Uh, I would like to thank, on behalf of the African American Museum and Cultural Center, I would like to thank all of you for participating in this community meeting today. Our museum has been an initiative since 2002. So we wouldn't be, so we would not be here without the work, dedication, and commitment of our all-voluntary board. I want to introduce some of our board members and let them stand so you'll know who they are when you go up to them to tell you how you want to participate in our museum. So we have Carmen Spratley on our board, Patricia Salisbury, Carlin Pinkins is on our board, Katerina Powdrell is on our board. Kyron isn't with us today. And then we have, luckily, a lot of people who don't like meetings, but do support us. And so we have Richard Joseph Scott Powdrell, who supports us in so many different ways. We've got Joe Powdrell, who works with us on our sports committee. We've got Thomas, who does all of our videoing and history. And then Brenda's husband, Joe, is here, and Brenda was such a part, and he was always a part of getting her places and participating in our museum. So that's our board. Patricia and Katerina, towards the end of the program, will be coming to you again to talk about ways you can engage in the museum. I just want to give a brief history. Like I said, 2002. So the museum, well, we've had the opportunity and the honor of meeting with living history while we developed exhibits like New Mexico's African American Legacy, Visible, Vital, Valuable, Facing the Rising Sun about homesteading, and It Takes a Village with our young people. But we got to meet, so in Las Cruces we met Grover Pettis. And Grover Pettis came alive telling us the story of his 640-acre homestead. And he mesmerized us when he talked about his divining stick and how he had gone around his 640 acres and found water with it and developed 3 wells. In Albuquerque, we were just so excited to hear Brenda Dabney, who was on our board, tell the story of her great-grandfather, John Collins, a Buffalo soldier with the 9th Cavalry and the 24th Infantry. And so proud to hear her talk about her mother, Virginia Ballou, who developed homes for African Americans on a 160-acre homestead in the 1950s. And then we got to talk with Elder Greer. And Elder Greer told us about how his family went to Mexico first. And they got in the uprising with General Pancho Villa and ended running for their lives, settling in New Mexico, where his mother, Mother Click, became a curandera in the Albuquerque community. And then we went to Vado, and we got to meet Bobby Boyer, a member of the Boyer family. We got to celebrate her 85th birthday. And she had so much energy as she brought to life the town of Vado, where she was born and raised. And she brought to life the post office and the school and the church and the hotels and the entrepreneurship of this African American town in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. So we have been able, in this 22 years, to touch the vitality of our current history as we journey to the value it has for our past. And we've also got to meet other historians, like Maisha Baton, who was an outstanding poet and who was a scholar on Blackdom. And we've gotten to do receptions with the community. We've met the community. We've met the African American Artists Guild. We've met our poets. We've met our musicians, our people who sing songs. Joseph Scott Powdrell opened one of our receptions with a beautiful classic called Make Them Hear You. You know, go out and tell the story. Let it echo far and near. Make them hear you. It's just really powerful. So we've done the other stuff too. I mean, we've done the flat exhibits. We get the documentation, we put up the boards, we found out the history of churches and social organizations and entrepreneurship within our communities that we present. But the thing I think that is most powerful is the stories. And we have been honored to hear the stories. And we were able to share this honor with young people in our community. So we had middle school, elementary school, and high school students who we trained in oral history, and we had them do oral history on prominent African Americans within the community, and they developed exhibit boards, they developed an exhibit, they presented it to the community, and we got to share in the excitement of taking them to Washington, D.C. to visit the African American Museum of History and Culture. So that takes us to why we're here today, what the museum is doing currently. So in 2022 and 2023, the museum got capital outlay to design a structure to house this vital history that we have. And the city is our fiscal agent for the distribution of these funds, and they hired Formative Architecture, which is here, they are here with us today, Eric Spurlock, who was part of the design team, who was here today, and ideum. And what they did was they had a community meeting, and they took those ideas and things that they got from the community meeting to design a museum. And they're going to present it today, hoping that it incorporates the spirit and the soul of our African American history, and that it is an experience that's a living experience. It's not a flat experience. It's something that you'll want to engage in. And moving forward, we have a bill in capital, we have a capital outlay request at the legislature right now to acquire the land that the architectural firm has told us would be perfect for the museum. So we have a $4,000 capital outlay bill that is going through the legislature right now. So I guess what the museum represents is that our history is alive and our culture is alive. And what we really need is community consensus and consciousness about the value of what we have. And so part of what we're doing today is we're coming to you, our community, our New Mexico community. And we are asking that you volunteer to come to meetings, that you volunteer your time and your energy and your expertise to fundraise, to publicize, to bring in more of the community, because I keep hearing different dates, but it looks like realistically, we're talking about a 5 to 9 year process from the beginning to the end of the final construction. So that's going to take all of us. It's going to take our entire community to make this beautiful vision you're about to see a reality. And so I am going to turn it over to Christine of Formative Architecture, and they're going to go through this wonderful museum and the whole process and where we are now. So thank you for coming.
Rita, for all the work that you have done.
See a little bit better. You'll see our faces up there in a minute since you can't see us here. But as Rita mentioned, thank you so much for having us. It's been really an honor to be working with Rita, with Patricia, with Eric, Katarina. Everyone has been wonderful throughout this process. So first and foremost, I want to introduce our team for a little bit. So as Rita mentioned, we are Formative Architecture. We're an architecture firm based here in downtown Albuquerque. We've been around for about 8 years. We specialize in visitor center experience, in large scale sort of community planning and large scale facility planning. So we've done a lot of work really similar to this around the state. Again, visitor experience, community engagement. We've done a lot of that. Educational work, which is going to be a large component of the museum. And then we've also partnered with ideum, who will introduce themselves here in a moment. So a little bit of background just on us individually. So as Rita mentioned, my name is Christine Williams. I'm a licensed architect in the state of New Mexico. I've been practicing in the state for about 15 years now. Graduate of UNM, I'm from Albuquerque, and my specialties range anything from, again, educational, large school buildings to community buildings to civic projects, museums, you name it, I've probably worked on it, multifamily housing. And I've been with Formative for about 4 years. I also teach at the university, so I have a lot of experience with education and educational architecture. And then Stephen Teeters, who's one of our founding principals, he obviously has been with the firm since the beginning. His partner Owen, who couldn't be here, they started the firm back in 2017. He has almost 20 years of experience, 18, 19 at this point, again, specializing in really large multi-million-dollar projects for the University of New Mexico, for Fish and Wildlife, so a lot of really big clients that we've worked with. Anything else you want to mention about yourself?
Well, I did want to pull the crowd really quick. I was thinking maybe we should turn on a little bit of light. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe the back one.
Sorry.
So the second one over.
Bear with me for a minute while I figure this out.
Yeah, to the left.
Maybe too much there, right?
Yeah, maybe just the front ones. Could you do that? No?
Sorry about that.
Is that okay? Yeah, okay, we'll do that. So, go
And
ahead.
then I guess, I wanted to follow up with Rita. Thank you very much for that beautiful introduction. I can't echo enough how enjoyable it has been to work with all of your team. And I'm always amazed at your memory, how you can tell all these stories. And I just see it as such an important mission to come up and design a building that will house all these stories, that can capture these voices and share them with generations to come. So thank you for that introduction, and I see that as a real important mission for us all today.
And so we're going to introduce ideum next. One thing also I wanted to mention just from the get-go is, as Rita mentioned, we've gone through a lot of meetings, a lot of sit-downs with the city and with the board of the African American Museum. These are just sort of big picture ideas to get us started, right? To start the fundraising process, right? It's a catalyst for that, to give you this amazing marketing package that you can then take out with you to help fundraise for this museum. So anything you see today, nothing's set in stone. Again, this is just kind of like, this is our dream, right? If we can get, you know, somebody drops $200 million in our lap, we can build this thing, right? So, but obviously, you know, when the time comes and we know how much we have in pocket, we can go back to, you know, and start to really like refine this design. So again, just keep in the back of your mind that anything you see today is not set in stone in any way. Okay, so anyway, but up next we do want to introduce ideum, who is our partner on this project.
Great, so my name is Becca Shreckengast. Hi. I am the Chief Experience Officer with ideum. We are a full-service design and build agency. We work nationally and globally for museums. We also do some corporate work, but our specialties in museums, especially like deep interpretive programs for museums. So we're figuring out experiences, immersive environments and galleries that really engage with the public. We have a specialty in multimedia experiences, immersive projection spaces, interactive multimedia, but we do all kinds of work. My background is I've been working with museums as a consultant or in museums in leadership positions for 25 years. I was a former director of exhibition experience at Carnegie Museum of Natural History, which is also connected to an art museum, which is also connected to a giant library, which is part of the Andy Warhol Museum Foundation and other things. So in leadership there, I learned a lot about sort of how multi-use, multi-audience spaces can work very well to enliven an entire community. For this project, we worked with Jaron Keener. Jaron and I worked together for many, many years at Carnegie Museum of Natural History. He's an excellent and award-winning museum professional who works now doing production management and building museum exhibitions for with Ravenswood in Chicago. He's a Chicago guy. He's back there now. We also work with Sam. Sam's a designer with ideum, and some of the illustrations you see of interior spaces are things that Sam put together, because it's not only about the building and how the building, and although it's very, very important, and I love working with formative architecture and everything that they've been able to envision for you all. It's awesome, and for our community and out here. But for also thinking about how those spaces interior work with the outside spaces, so that we can make sure that a lot of people are served by it. So we'll show you some of the interior concepts.
Yeah, and another thing that, you know, about ideum and also formative is we do have a lot of experience working with the city as well and working together. As Rita mentioned, this is in collaboration with the city of Albuquerque, so we know their process, we know a lot of the team players, we've worked with them on a number of projects. So another reason, you know, I think our team was a good fit for the project. And then Eric, do you want to say a little bit about yourself as a consultant?
Well, my name is Eric Spurlock. I've had a business here for 41 years, and we do luxury home design. And I was fortunately asked to come on board by the architectural firm, and we are working very hard at trying to put a building together that serves everybody. It's a multi-function building. And my request was that it was an actual destination point. But all in all, I've been very fortunate to be able to work with Steve and Christine. And we just have been working, everybody's been bending over backwards trying to get a project done a little more quickly than it's been going. Rita's been on this thing for quite a while, and I really appreciate her patience, and we are actually seeing it come to fruition. And I also will be serving on the advisory consultation for the project as to making sure that the project encompasses everybody, and not only that it shows what we in the Southwest are about as far as Black people. And it's not a museum that's just for Black people, it's for everybody that's been involved in helping us and supporting us. And I'm looking forward to the future of the building coming to fruition. So, and I just want to thank ideum. Ideum is great. They have been doing a lot to put the functionality of the building together and all of its intricacies that come with them, with the electronics, and trying to make sure that the building does what it needs to do for future. And it's a very, very good team together with both the architectural firm and IDM together are creating a building that's hands down the most expensive building the state of New Mexico has ever built. So I want to thank you guys for being here, and I want to thank both IDM and Alternative Architecture for helping us put this together.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Eric. I do want to recognize what an important conduit you've been in terms of representing the board and also representing the architectural profession. You've really been a great conduit, keeping us all in check and helping move the design forward in a very meaningful and effective way. So thank you very much. Really quick, just to kind of outline the goals of today's meeting. We've captured the introduction of the core kind of design team. Next, we want to review the process. How did we get here? So we'll kind of go through the steps that helped us to arrive at our design solution. Within that, we want to describe the design itself, and of course, the very important exhibitry within the design. And then we do want to spend some time today talking about next steps. As Christine began today's conversation, this is really just the beginning, and we're off to a great start, but there's a lot of hard work ahead of us. And then last but not least, we'll leave a lot of time for questions and answers. What we would ask is, throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, if you could write them down on Post-it notes and apply them to the boards on the wall over here. We're calling that a parking lot. We will definitely get to all the questions today after the presentation. Additionally, for those that are joining us virtually, if you could please add your questions within the chat, and then at the end, we'll go through the chat and we'll discuss those questions that were within the chat as well. So with that, let's just look at a brief timeline and kind of discuss where we are at today. So what we've completed is what we're calling the design and marketing effort. Basically trying to produce a design, a concept that can be taken and used for marketing purposes. Marketing in terms of soliciting interest and soliciting funds. And so that's basically what we've accomplished to date. But as you can see, we have a long timeline ahead of us with discrete steps that Rebecca will kind of explain in more detail towards the end of our presentation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Becca to talk about a community workshop that we had in this very room about a year ago. And that really kind of kicked off the design process for us.
Great, Stephen. So we love this part of the process in our like blue sky thinking is when we get grounded. And the grounding in programming of a building and exhibits and interpretive stories is really coming together with the communities that we're going to serve and figuring out what the priorities are. Like, why should this museum, cultural center, exist in Albuquerque? What are the goals? So, and then from that, what do we want that building to offer the community itself? What do we want the visitors to come away with? So what are those outcomes that we're trying to generate through the program of the building? So we were able to get together on February 6th and do some hands-on workshops where we brainstormed different priorities. We looked at some different buildings around the country and locally, and kind of figured out where the African American Museum and Cultural Center of New Mexico fits into all of that in the community, and had lots of conversations, and we tried to encourage everyone to participate, and it was an excellent turnout. We had a lot, an incredible amount of ideas that came out of that. And the activities that we did explored also who the audiences are for the Museum and Cultural Center, and it was fairly large group that we were starting to feel we could invite into the walls in Albuquerque and have that large impact. So in the outcomes, we gathered information about the needs, purposes, and functions also of the museum and created a report that came out. If anybody wants a copy of that report, we still have that and can distribute it to you. So the institutional goals that were prioritized in these conversations were to educate the public on African Americans' contributions to New Mexico while preserving Black cultural heritage and history. So it's an education and preservation goal. We also wanted to create a safe, inclusive space for community to gather for celebrations and for discussions of the Black experience. And finally, to support artists, showcase African American performing arts, and elevate New Mexico's Black history on a national level. So these are these big, overarching, prioritized purposes of the African American Museum and Cultural Center. That's what we want to do largely. And then for the visitors, what we want visitors to this location to do, which is a little different than what the institution itself does. They want visitors to be feeling pride, empowerment, and a commitment to creating positive change in the world. Gain a deeper appreciation of African American history in New Mexico and the importance of preserving their own stories. And then we want people to feel immersed in Black culture, cuisine, and traditions, lead with joy and admiration for African American contributions. So those are like really big things that are guiding, and as you get into sort of things like interpretive design, you create films or exhibits, or when you're thinking about artworks that we go back to this, and these end up guiding a lot of how the architecture unfolded, a lot of how the interpretive experience unfolded.
Yeah. You can take because I know you come right after me. So step number 2, following that community workshop, was really for our team to kind of hunker down and research. And this was also punctuated by several meetings with Rita and with Patricia and the city of Albuquerque. But really diving into, as Eric mentioned, this isn't just for New Mexico, but sort of the regional history. We want to be a destination, but also we want to tie into the network of other museums across the country. So we actually did take a visit to the DC, to the International Museum in Charleston. We were able to meet actually with their director and, kind of pick his brain about what works, what doesn't work, ideas in terms of how you circulate through the museum. They're all very different. So we went and were able to tour those museums, researching other really important architecture around the world and ideas that we liked that we could pull from that and inspiration we could draw from the history that really then started to inform what the building could look like. And same with Exhibitry.
Yeah, so what we did too in our research is we looked at sort of the structure of some the African American museums nationally, and like what they offered, how big their spaces were, what their visitation was, and how they fit into their communities. And we also looked at history museums in New Mexico and what they offered, and how their story, how their interpretive structure was constructed, and then cultural centers in Albuquerque. So we looked at how big their spaces were, which ones had theaters, which ones didn't, like what were some of their educational offerings, programmatic offerings, and really looked at the larger impact that these museums are having in the city and in their respective cities.
I also forgot to mention we had a really great call with Dexter Nelson from the Blair Caldwell Research Center up in Denver. And so again, that kind of idea of like, how could we share information? How could we possibly in the future share exhibits? How could we become part of this larger regional network?
We also looked deeply at New Mexico tourism data to figure out who is coming to New Mexico. And we were pleasantly surprised to see a very high percentage. I believe it was 15 to 30%, depending on season, of African American tourists to New Mexico, a very high percentage of our tourists. So what we recognized is that Albuquerque, being a location right at the airport, would be a great destination to have a cultural African American museum and cultural center from a tourism perspective. So we saw a real opportunity there from the data that we captured from tourism.
So then, yeah, kind of building upon what designers have looked at and designed in the past, we use that as kind of a springboard in terms of the design team kind of cataloging what we thought would work best and what was important to build upon within our design for the Albuquerque project. And so we looked at a variety of built forms. We looked first in New Mexico, we looked in the Southwest region. We went beyond the borders of the United States. We looked at African, very iconic and rich history of building in terms of its materiality with grass, straw, wood, also materials from this earth as far as dirt and clay, concrete, etc. Really found a lot of admiration for what those before us have done. And we balanced that with also some more contemporary objects of buildings that are being built today. So we did a lot of research and study. We followed that with a lot of sketching and collaboration with Eric and Rita's team, going over different ideas, trying to see what we thought would be the best fit for Albuquerque. We went through multiple iterations of this. I think finally we came up with about 4 concepts. And so we're showing a couple of those today to you. The team, ideum and Christine, put together a big framework plan that includes all of this information that was alluded to earlier. So we can definitely share that large document. I don't recall, is it 200 pages or so?
It's pretty big,
Yeah.
but it is available.
But a lot of good information in there in terms of how we got to where we are today. Once again, another example of different conceptual sketches that we put together, kind of doing a test fit of how we could apply lessons learned from the past to the design of today. And we basically wrapped that effort up with the conclusion of 7 ideas. And so what we wanted to do when we began the design is to make sure that we included 7 ideas within the design. First, we wanted to make sure that we had an outside skin that was very representational of the history of African American culture. And then within the museum itself, we wanted it to be very clear in terms of visitor wayfinding, make sure the visitor understood where the different pieces and parts were. Next, we wanted to also have a lot of focus on the site elements, recognizing, as Becca said, we're gonna have a lot of visitors from out of town that are coming to this site, and we really wanted them to appreciate all the site that it could offer. And a couple ideas that we thought would be effective for this site would be incorporating local artists on art panels and or sculptures, and trying to think about a procession through the site before you arrive at the museum so that the site itself can be a meaningful experience. We looked at exterior circulation, getting you to the roof of the structure. Albuquerque is really amazing for the distant views that we have. So if you're able to appreciate the rooftop as a building element, that's really critical to understanding the context of the building. We wanted to make sure we included that within the design. Also, we did look at trying to incorporate some African, not only architectural elements, but cultural elements within the design of the building itself, such as these celebratory drum shapes that you'll see within the design. And last but not least, we looked at a calendar of critical events, and we put that on a circular plan calendar that helped to organize the plan of the museum itself. So with that, I'll turn it over to Christine to kind of describe the design concept before you today.
Yes. Yeah, I think my favorite meeting was when we finished presenting all 4 schemes and we said, Rita, which one do you like? And she said, I want all 4 of them. So we had to go back and somehow figure out how to make them all into one. So, which one is this one? Okay, got it. So just to kind of walk you through the site plan, and obviously we've got the model here too, if anybody wants to look at that a little bit later, but the idea was that this could be adapted to any site. As Rita mentioned, they currently have a request with the legislature to get money to purchase the land. There was a few sites that we looked at, but it's all fictional right now. So the idea was that whatever this building and this site ends up being, that it could be adapted to whatever site we end up with. But the general idea is we have the large building kind of seated here at the back, and following the language of that building, Steve will walk us through the floor plan here in a little bit. As he said, we've got kind of this large drum sort of performance space right at the heart of the building. And so using those kind of circular lines to start to dictate what this site looks like, really focusing on, okay, visitor experience, versus pedestrian versus vehicular, how you actually begin to access the building, back of house, right? So deliveries, we do have a cafe, that will need deliveries and how that works and how, we can separate that from sort of the public face of the building. But the biggest sort of idea, as Steve started to touch on, was this idea of having pedestrian access. A lot of the sites that we looked at were urban, right? They're walkable. You could get there by vehicle or by walking or bike. And so having this idea where as you're this sort of access that comes into the building, and this line sits on one of those critical calendar points that Steve was talking about. I believe it's Juneteenth, correct? Isn't that this one? Right. And having this pedestrian path, but then being allowed to sort of wander among these other pathways that could be beautifully landscaped, and then we'd have these different sort of walls scattered around that could have artwork and history integrated into them. And the idea is that I could come here on my lunch break and hang out and learn history without even going into the museum, right? So again, really making this a public space. We'll see some images of that later. And then we also had the idea of both an interior sort of large gathering, what we call celebration hall, inside the building, but then duplicating that outside with what we are calling Celebration Plaza, which would be this large amphitheater space where you could have weddings, you could have large gatherings, school groups come and sit there, somebody just having their lunch. Everybody can use that outdoor space. So that's sort of the main access. But certainly if you're just coming in for a quick visit, or if you're dropping off, somebody, we have this large roundabout and some general parking where then you can just directly access that plaza, which then leads directly into the museum. So here's sort of an overall view of what that could potentially look like. So again, this large access way that brings you to the top of the amphitheater. There are direct access stairs that go down, so you could maybe just quickly come down and enter into Celebration Plaza. So this is sort of raised up higher. And here we can start to see some of those large panels. Again, this idea, the concept behind this was this sort of peeling away of history to get us to the truth and to the actual history which lives here in the museum. So as you're walking, these large walls are starting to peel back as you come, and then at the top here you're met with this really beautiful view of the museum ahead of you. Here's kind of what that might look like as you're starting to walk towards the building. And again, these are just sort of ideas that we had of maybe, these could be reliefs, whether they're done by local artists or they're historic in nature. We can certainly work with artists on that. Here's what that space could look like while you're inside of it, that large, what we're calling the art berm. So it's a large berm space with these different, kind of landscaped areas. Here's the amphitheater. So again, we imagine that being landscaped, but for outdoor events, maybe some kind of water feature integrated into that. Another view in the distance, you can see sort of the drop-off area, and then you can come directly in and then access. This is sort of the security vestibule that then leads into the museum, so whether that's for ticketing or security. That was one common theme we saw at, I think it was the museum in Charleston. One of his negative points was that they didn't really account for security, and now it's sort of attached to the outside without really any thought. So that was one of his main comments to us, was to make sure we thought about that ahead of time. Some of the plaza spaces around the back, so actually let me jump back really quickly. So back here around each of these gallery spaces, we do have also patios, so dedicated patio space to each of those galleries. So one of them being this, which we imagine would be off of the cafe space, so you could have dining tables, you could have markets. They're really just flexible spaces. We also discussed the idea of having some kind of outdoor exhibit space, so maybe a replica of Blackdom or other important site features that we could build and people could actually interact with. We talked about having a community garden for students, so this would be off of the educational gallery where you could have lessons and have an actual active garden, maybe with a small orchard as well. And then lastly, oops, I guess I don't have a rendering of that, but in the distance you can see we also talked about the idea of an outdoor sculpture garden for local artists that could participate in that as well.
Okay, so next I want to walk through the floor plans and some of the associated renderings of those different floor plans. Currently, the museum is organized on 3 levels. So as a team, we decided what needs to be included in the museum, and then as we refine the design, we tried to figure out where those spaces would go. And so the 2 upper levels are for visitors, they're the public spaces, and then the level below is very much service oriented to serve the museum itself. So we'll start on the main or ground level, and this is the celebration plaza that Christine had described for those outdoor events leading to the secured vestibule. That's the main way into the interior of the museum itself. Once you arrive, you're underneath that grand drum that you saw in the aerial view that Christine was showing. And we're calling this Celebration Hall. And that is a collection of exhibitry and gathering spaces, kind of a central node that is grounded by a meditation room. We wanted to make sure that we created a secure, safe interior environment for visitors to reflect on many of the stories that they've heard throughout their visit and reflect on what they might want to do the next time they come back to the museum. Around that central core, we have 3 gallery spaces, approximately 4,000 square foot each. They're designated to different components of the exhibitry that Rebecca will get into here in a little bit. We kind of have your back of house service elements here. We have classroom spaces here that can lead directly onto that main entrance plaza. We also have mercantile retail shop, as well as the cafe that once again can lead onto that celebration plaza, as well as onto the Blackdom patio in the back and along the outside community orchard components. So with that, Becca, can you walk us through a little bit of the renderings and the exhibitry of the main floor?
Sure. Maybe I could go back to the floor plan just one moment. So what we were looking at when we were thinking about audiences and how to really activate this building with the communities across Albuquerque was that the tourists as an audience are really important to bring in and to attract for ticket prices and or ticket monies, and also just to expand the story larger outside of the story of the Southwest, African Americans in the Southwest, more largely and nationally. So making a tourist destination is important. We are also very interested in cross-generational groups and repeat local visitors. So how do we get local visitors to get memberships and come back and really see this as a place that they feel at home? And then also school groups as a major audience as well. So thinking about all of those types of audiences. So this is sort of the celebration hall concept. What we thought here is this could be, overall lots of beautiful imagery, celebratory imagery. Every screen that we put in this space has images of a giant graduation ceremony of African Americans graduating from different schools. And this would happen periodically in a quiet way, and then at announced moments there could be interaction, where there could be dancing, singing, a call and response interactivity moment, or we had like a say their names kind of activity. So there could be moments when this turns into a programmed space where there's a linear media presentation that kind of takes over the whole environment, and then it goes away and turns back into celebratory imagery of African American. We'll show some more images of that in a minute. And then we thought for that cross-generational group, we need to create spaces that, communicate knowledge between generations and also support cross-generational visitors. So if people are coming from different age groups, children and adults, large family groups, or tourists coming in families, which is 30% of all tourists are coming with children. So we wanted to make sure that that was something we could do. So this idea came up, well, let's create an art space with a changing gallery component. This whole space is an art gallery with some movable walls, so you could potentially have more than one show in this exhibition at any one time. That gets you your repeat visitor, so you can do marketing around new gallery openings. You have different sizes, so you can close one and keep one open, so you can always have an offer even when you're changing them out. So these spaces are flexible for different galleries. We have a history gallery with a core history gallery. It's like a long-term permanent exhibition, so everybody will always know when they come to this museum, they can get African American history of New Mexico and the Southwest here. But we didn't want that to become like a staid. We wanted people that to be active, that history is super active, we're learning more all the time. So we created a smaller changing gallery for history exhibitions that could change out if you found a great object, tell a new story, and you can also share really hard histories here. Because this is changing out, you might discover something and you can experiment with different interpretive methods. So this is sort of an experimental gallery that the curator can really play with and work with local historians and others to make an exciting offer. And then we were thinking that from a cross-generational standpoint, we could take a lot of the storytelling in here and package it for a younger audience. One thing that Albuquerque does not have is a imaginary play type children's experience. We have Explora, which is very science-based, it's very technical. It's a wonderful place and it's very successful, but it doesn't have any, you can't pretend to be a doctor in that space. You can't, learn about farming in that space. There's nothing cultural connected to that space. It feels like it could be anywhere. And this would feel much more grounded as a sort of family destination with stories about African Americans in New Mexico. So trying to give an offer to serve all of those audiences, to really get anyone who comes here could find something in this, whether they're art interested, cultural interested, if they're coming with families. And then also the exterior environment, potentially of having a recreated black dome, or even moving a building, or depending on what type of acquisition you could make, so that you can go inside and really, from that immersive perspective, be inside that historical story. So this is the idea for the celebration hall, where we would use show controls in order to sort of create an immersive environment that would feel very celebratory, with periodic presentations that would be more composed and message-driven linear media productions, or music, for example. But then would not always be sort of loud or active. It could be more calm and just different types of programs, but always new. So if you came as a visitor, and you stayed like 3 or 4 hours, you would see most of them, but if you came again, you would see new ones as well. So getting that repeat local visitor excited about like a moment. And this is more passive, because the other exhibitions might be more active, where you're really focusing and reading and learning, and this comes in and you can kind of be in it and feel immersive and celebratory. So Sandy, I did these illustrations. That's the idea of like graduation. We saw some video that was super inspiring, and we just thought that might be an example of something. But again, this is very preliminary and just one concept. Then this is what we are imagining about the fine art space, some temporary moving walls, so that you could do almost any show in here. A large show or a small show, you could get one great artwork and show it off, or have a traveling exhibition. So one thing that would be great, as you're acquiring a collection, you could create temporary shows that could travel throughout the state. You could also accept shows nationally and generate shows that travel nationally. So that was going to bring in a lot of repeat local education, and where you can showcase some of the best African American artists in the nation in this gallery. So world class there. And then the idea of having sort of this vibrant, imaginary children's museum to bring families in to be immersed in these stories, to really feel home here, and attracting a whole local repeat audience that is not being served currently in Albuquerque. But also, we're thinking about those cross-generational knowledge sharing and providing opportunities for parents and grandparents and children and extended family to come together, and all of you be able to, or all of us to be able to experience this together. And then the core history gallery. So this is sort of a permanent exhibition space where things can change out, but it's more very curatorial, very straightforward. We want people to always know that this offer and these histories are here and they're authentic, and this gives you sort of that curatorial prowess. So this is real, this is the real stuff, these are the actual stories, and that is really important to ground everything else you're going to do in this space. I find that's what museums do very well, is that the general public trust museums, and being able to share histories in museums are very impactful. So having the real stuff there and sharing the stories in here, this is a type of environment where people will be very open to learning about history. So real stuff, these are little images, got a little dark on this, but, and then Steve, do you want to talk about some?
Yeah, this is a rendering of that meditation or reflection space that in the center of Celebration Hall. Once again, a way that you can get a little bit of a reprieve to kind of contemplate on your experience of that day and try to better understand the different stories and voices that you've heard. Next. All right, so the second of the public levels is the upper level, and the main interior space of the upper level is this performance space. And so we wanted to create a facility that would be iconic and monumental, not only from the outside, but also on the inside, something that would be very memorable as a visitor, as a participant in one of these performances. And so we looked at the different performance spaces in Albuquerque, and we thought, what can we do different to make sure that this facility would have a different type of experience in terms of presentation and audience performance space. And so we looked at a theater space that could seat at least 300, and it would be more in the round. And we'll show you a couple renderings of that here in a minute. Additionally, for the upper level, we have a lot of rooftop spaces. And so we're thinking that could be utilized as sculptural garden spaces for you to walk amongst the artwork, as well as a rooftop deck that could include party space with rooftop bar that's directly connected to the restaurant below to kind of take you in and out of the performance space while enjoying the beautiful views of the surrounding Albuquerque landscape. And then here's a rendering of the interior space that Sam helped put together. We're thinking that you could probably use the space in a multitude of configurations, but one being kind of presentation, speaking mode here, but then also projection. We could definitely have some different movies, exhibitry content, etc. That could be kind of on a rotational schedule for visitors to kind of pop in and out of the performance hall, depending on what they want to see that day. But then last but not least, we were trying to imagine how the space itself could be an experience that would be quite memorable, as well as provide exhibitry options kind of projected on the outside of that interior space. Here's a couple renderings outside of that large performance space as visitors are kind of walking amongst a sculptural art space and enjoying the cafe behind us with some seating here. Another view of the rooftop space, looking to views of the city beyond and some of those outdoor spaces below that we had talked about earlier. All right, last but not least, in terms of floor plans, we have the lower level. This is the service function of the building, so that'll include office space for all the workers. This will be where the collections would be housed. This would be a space where you could work on upcoming exhibits that need to be fabricated, so a little bit of shop space. And then I'm gonna ask Christine to kind of complete the presentation here.
Yeah, so just sort of some overall views again of the outside of the museum. So as Steve was mentioning, access, down to the lower level, maybe patio space for employees, but definitely, the deliveries and that are brought into the lower level. Obviously for a museum, keeping those collections safe out of, they don't require a lot of natural light like some of the other higher up floors, so they would be located down in that lower level. The little, one thing we didn't mention was the little kind of pyramid guys here. So those are usually what are referred to as light monitors. So they actually bring light, diffuse light down into the gallery spaces. So those actually do function, with galleries, and when you're housing artwork, you can't have a lot of direct light, it'll damage the artwork. So making sure we're thinking about how can we still bring in light, but maybe, letting it be a little bit more diffused. Here we can see some of that access from the exterior up onto the rooftop. So if you don't want to go in and go all the way through the museum, you can certainly get to that upper floor from the outside as well. So a lot of the whole process, we're thinking about how can we make money, right? So rentable space, how can we get donors? Maybe you have a donor that'd be interested in sponsoring the performance hall or sponsoring the cafe. Maybe you have a visiting chef that's coming in and cooking in the cafe. Maybe the retail is rotating. You have local vendors that are coming in and out. You could potentially have authors that are coming in advertising. And we had a small, again, the retail space, or in the little, we have a library over here attached to the educational block. So how can we generate revenue? How can we constantly have things rotating, as Becca mentioned, to bring people in again and again and again, really making this sort of a hub, not just for the history and for, the gallery spaces, but also for people that are functioning as artists, as musicians in the community. So just another view of sort of the back side of the museum. So again, here we can see those sort of multifunctional patio spaces. Again, maybe the sculptural garden, so for outdoor. Again, looking for flexibility. If you do large scale sculptures and they can't quite fit in the gallery, maybe they could possibly go outside. And then pass it back to Becca. So this is no, you're good. To kind of talk about next steps.
Yeah, so part of this work we also did was implementation planning work. So we kind of did some foundational work where we learned sort of like all the underlying need, all of the hopes, goals, outcomes. We looked at visioning, imagining what this place could be, what it would be like, and then some implementation planning, like what would it take to do. So a building like this doesn't come together all very quickly. It's a large building, some fundraising and things associated with that. I'll come back to this slide in a minute, but I'm just going over. So there's some major project milestones: getting the site and all the permits for construction, getting a manager to administer all of the contracts to build the building, architecture. That still has to happen. This is a preliminary concept. There is still a lot of architecture that needs to be done in order to create a functional building. Curation and collections. You guys have a lot of awesome stories and have been producing exhibitions, and you have some groundwork that is certainly something to leverage. But again, it's the museum, you're going to be able to tell a lot of stories, and you're going to want to start to acquire a collection. And how that collection comes to you will be something curatorial can do, and the registrar, and figuring out how you're going to store things. An architect of record, so there's the design architects, which Formative is now, and then an architect of record that will help with the construction documents and hiring your general contractor to build the building, and really getting the building together about by the end of year 5. But we'll go back and look at this. This schedule of 9 years, like things can be compressed or stretched out. So this is sort of just an example, really, of what a project calendar could be. Building construction, exhibit design and exhibit installation, fabrication and installation, and then your performing arts center. You're going to need to program and schedule that before you open, because the types of events that you're going to be planning need to be reserved a year in advance with different artists. So it's a lot of work, and it does take a long time. There's a capital campaign that you'll have to do. So pre-campaign planning is kind of what you're doing now, getting your case for support, setting your goals, defining your objectives. You're gonna figure out, like, start talking to your lead donors, getting some commitments, finalizing how you're going to raise the money, and develop your detailed campaign plan. So the capital campaign for a building like this is usually fairly quiet up until, the end of year 5. And then once you've gotten most of your donations sort of promised and secured, you do this giant kickoff when you're at about 75% of funding. So once you have that 75% of funding, it's going to happen. You're pretty much good to go. And you do this, you announce your goal, you issue a press release, you acknowledge all your donors, you have a giant party, and you get ready, because this is getting near it. And this will feel very active at this point. This will be fairly quiet. There'll be a lot happening and a lot going on, but this is when it'll become very real and very public. And then these public phases, year 5 to year 8, as you're broadening your outreach, you're soliciting the rest of the money, closing that funding gap, and also thinking about ongoing operating costs, ticketing, planning through the operation of the building. And then stewardship after year 9. Now you're acknowledging everyone. The building will very likely have exhibits that acknowledge, as well as web presences that acknowledge. You're collecting, so when you're collecting a lot of the money and the promises, you're celebrating everyone, and the donors are very active in attending events, talking with the board, and just feeling like they're part of the success of the project. There will be a lot of people that you'll need to, that the board will need to engage with, both contractors and consultants that will be hired, but also sort of, through contracts, but also hires and appointments. And that, maybe people from the board, it might be new people, contractors. Now, a feasibility study consultant or coach could come in. A feasibility study is when someone who has set up fundraising campaigns and help people sort of coach boards through coming up with a capital campaign plan. They come in and they also talk to a lot of people and give you a sense of where and how to reach the donor audiences. And they give you a feasibility, like we planned this large project that has a pretty high price point. They may say that it's actually 80% of that they see as sort of like that's the feasibility. Or they may say that this is great. We found a lot of interest and know how we're going to do this. So it's good to have that coach, somebody who's raised many millions of dollars previously and worked with other organizations that have built new buildings before and can help you access sort of those processes and tools. Ongoing, you're going to be working with design architects. You probably want to talk to consultants about the cafe, museum cafe, about the museum store, about security in the building, about your collections and your performance venue before the design of the architecture is done, so that they can feed into that and make sure that the spaces you're designing are super functional at the end, and you have all of the expertise advising in those areas. Architect of record, there's just somebody who's going to sort of manage the construction of the building, doing those, a general contractor that will build the building, as well as an exhibit and/or multimedia designer, could be any group, and then a fabricator that will also build and install all the exhibits. These hires, a development director. It could be an appointment as well, somebody who takes on that role, but somebody who is going to be running the capital campaign, both the quiet phase and the direct phase. A contract administrator, all of these contractors and consultants will have contracts and things that are due and things they're supposed to do, and there'll be payments made, and somebody needs to be looking at it all, make sure that they're doing the things that they said that they would do. So it's a big job in contract administration with multiple contractors. a lead curator or a group of curators who work together, people who are doing the research, identifying objects, talking to museums about loans potentially of objects, gathering the stories that this museum needs to represent, and making sure that you have those stories in the museum. Year 8, there's going to be a lot of people that need to come on board, people who are doing marketing, facilities care and maintenance, the Performing Arts Center, education. You're going to have school groups coming in and out of this, security, visitor services, and maintenance and cleaning staff. So all of these types of people come in near the end. And then in year 9, you have like all of your floor staff that you need to bring in, and you're going to have these rotations of security staff and visitor services staff and education staff. So those are some of the last people that come in. Go back. So this 9-year schedule is a rough. It could be 8, it could be 11, it could be 6 if things go really smoothly, or maybe in the initial consultation, sort of the scope changes a little bit. So those will be things that you have to stay on top of, sort of this calendar. But what we're looking at now is pre-campaign planning, maybe hiring a fundraising consultant or a coach to conduct that feasibility study to get your price point together for the building, locate funds for the site, start to figure out, and that's what Rita is doing. Rita is doing a lot of this with the board right now. So really, really working on this. And explore those potential sites and negotiating a real estate purchase. This is a huge step, acquiring that site. And then you're going to be looking at, well, we're going to have to hire all these contractors. That's when you're bringing your contract administrator on board or appointing someone to perform in that role. You're beginning the quiet phase of the campaign and engaging the design architect for concept and schematic design work. This is where you're asking your consultants, you're planning your cafe, your store, your security, your collections. Architects know a lot about buildings, but they don't necessarily know all of the intricacies of running a museum store specifically. Somebody who's run a museum store is really good to talk to about how big the spaces should be, and if it's just a small consultation, it's worth doing. Similarly, security in the building. That's going to be a huge thing and something that was recommended to us by the other benchmarks that museums that we spoke to. So I think making sure that building and the collections are secure is important. And you have a whole performing arts venue. So talking to someone who's managed that type of space before too, to make sure that the plans that the architect is drawing will actually meet the need, and you won't have to be retrofitting the building later to be more functional. So these are like a good cost to spend early on in the design process so that you're not retrofitting spaces after opening. So then you're going to engage this design architect for contract work for schematic, which is when things start to really get real. That's when you're setting your budget. So during schematic design, between 3 and 4, that's when your budget gets kind of nailed down for the whole project. And you're continuing this quiet campaign. So then there's detailed design and construction documents, year 4 and year 5, that's sort of the architect path. And then when everything is about 75% funded, like I said, that's when you're kicking off your public campaign and it's a real thing. That's when everything's going to go into more the outside of the world of drawings and plans and conversations and promises for money. This is when it's going to be, okay, we've got 75% of the money promised. Now we're going to go. This is a real thing and we're going to activate. So that's when you start to hire your builder, your museum builder. You get your exhibit designer on board. You start acquiring collections. So maybe different museums have promised like long-term loans of objects, or you've discovered a bunch of objects. This is when you start to say, okay, we got this. And these objects start to come into either storage spaces or the registration process starts, where there's sort of this, you do all the paperwork and then they promise to a long-term loan or give collections to the museum. And then when it's funded, you have this big capital campaign, a big party. And from here, this is like lots of marketing, lots of active public conversations. Sometimes people hire a PR firm around this time as well. I haven't put that in here, but that's when everything gets really sort of public, and when you're going to be sort of seen in your plan. Your building is starting to beginning construction, and people are going to have questions, and it just becomes a much more public endeavor. You'll probably, because you're going to be, you're having an event, you're hiring someone to do your exhibits and essentially work in your building to plan all of these exhibits and work with your curator and this other design firm to build all the exhibits. You begin your exhibit design, you acquire your collections, and this public campaign. Here, year 7, you're done with your exhibit design. You hire an exhibit fabricator. You're coming up with your marketing plan to get people to come. You're thinking about all the events that you're going to be throwing, all of the parties, all of the web ads and billboards and Google ads that are going to be out there in the world. You're, again, getting more collections, getting these set up to put in the exhibits, and continuing that public campaign. This year 8, this is the real 8, the real year when it's a building. You're going to need all of sort of the people that are going to be working in the building, those leaders, to kind of come on board and commit to those roles, whether they're hired or appointed, or but likely will need, because it's going to be such a big job, they're likely going to need salaries even before the building is open. You'll need to schedule that performing arts program for the year, so that when the building opens, you have all of these lively, marketable events to bring people in. My hope is that, like, by the time you open that the new museum, it is so exciting. Everybody in Albuquerque's heard about it. There's like an event they want to go to. There's an artist that they know is going to be there. They've heard that there's going to be a children's museum in Albuquerque. People are psyched to come, and I think there'll even be people who are planning to drive out or fly out from Phoenix and other places around to see the museum. There should be that. That's where the buzz is really happening, because your marketing is going. You've got objects, and then you occupy the building in year 9, install everything, and then you open. And that's when you're hiring all your operational staff, daily operational staff. That's why you need these people on board, because they need to know, they need to do all this hiring and planning and organization of people. And then you open. And yay! Sorry, that's a long time. But it's all in one thing. But I more or less, it's a big endeavor. And it can be shorter than 9 years, it can be longer than 9 years. But there are sort of like this 75% funded is sort of like that moment when, I think also I should maybe have put here, like, set your budget. That would also be up here between years 3 and 4, setting that budget. Because when you're designing a building and you've done the design work, if you change the budget after it's designed, you have to go back and repeat design. So setting that budget before design is complete, and then when it's funded, that's like, this starts to be much more active. What else? We go into these. So overall costs. So the building construction, we're estimating right now at around 82 million in the format of the building that we have itself. The exhibits,
And to give you some kind of context, the one in Charleston was 120 million, right? Isn't that the number we're giving? It was like 100 to 120.
Total or
yeah.
just the construction?
What's that?
Total or just the construction?
I believe that was everything, correct?
We can get a better answer
Yeah.
for you on that. I don't recall that, sorry.
yeah. So a new building is very expensive. 82 million, that would, so then we have doing all the exhibits, filling those spaces with exhibits is around 14 million. We have included operating expenses for the first couple of years for around 10 million, because you want to open with those in hand as part of the campaign. Marketing is a smaller sliver, but an important thing. I don't even think I have a number for that, but it's about 2% of the overall budget. The site purchase, we kind of earmarked 10 million here for that. Architectural contracting, similar to the cost of the site, about 11 million. Staffing during the project, that's going to be a cost so that people can have salaries and really commit to the time, and that'll increase over the course of the 9 years. We're only spending a salary of one person or two people in the first 5 years, and then it's going to, it'll start getting more substantial. Collections, we've put a $5 million budget here for the acquisition of collection items for the tour curators, both from an archives perspective and an object collection. And then just doing the fundraising work has its own fees as well. So that's a small bit. So this is sort of the overall, and I didn't put the total because I was scared by it. But it is around 136 million total in this projected budget currently. As it unfolds over, year one, not so much, but to get really kicked off in the fundraising, it starts to get expensive to get the building designed, to get the different consultants on board. So yeah, there is this interesting pulse.
So, obviously that's a lot of money.
Yes.
As we mentioned at the beginning, this is if we get everything we want, right? Absolutely everything. We're able to do this and we get everything we want. As Becca mentioned through that, she mentioned bringing on an architectural and an engineering team later on in the process. So as we said, what we've been hired for is this marketing campaign. So that includes the model, the boards. We're going to show you an animation that we can make available to everyone to share if you want. The brochures that were printed, which more can be made. So that's kind of what we've been tasked with. Eventually, once you do have money in hand and you're ready to start thinking about construction and you have your site purchased, because there's public funds involved in this, or we imagine there will be public funds involved in this, we cannot be directly hired for that task, and an actual public proposal process would have to be done. Obviously, we'd apply for it and hope you pick us because we've been part of this, but at that point, you would hire an architect to then help you go, okay, we only raised 80 million. Great, we can still build a project for 80 million, but then we have to sit down and go, okay, well, we'll have to cut this, we might have to cut that, make it a little smaller to meet that budget. So what Becca's presented is the ultimate idea, right? Everything that we think we want and we would love to have, but we get it, it's a lot of money, and it's gonna be through this process we can determine the final budget, and then the architect will help kind of narrow that down to meet what you were able to fundraise. So obviously we want to go out guns blazing and showing them what we'd like to have as part of the marketing, right? We don't want, what happens often with projects is you show them something smaller, well, that's what you're going to raise, right? So we'd rather shoot for the moon, be advertising something that we really want, and then we'll see where we land and go from there, right? So just keep that in the back of your mind, because yeah, it's a huge number, right? But again, that's us shooting for the moon.
But it is possible.
It is possible, yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's where that feasibility consultant, development consultant will be very, very helpful in that they'll figure it out for you. They've done this before. I've worked with them before where we've set our budget for a capital campaign project, and they have shifted that. But they also help validate and give direction. So just to give you that path, that course to take, and those conversations that need to happen out there in the world.
So as we mentioned, as part of this package, we've got the printed boards. There's the framework plan that we can provide, which is the full report with all of our meeting notes and everything incorporated, the notes from the community meeting. We have the brochures, we have the physical model that Rita and her team are going to be taking around with them, and we also have this animation. So again, this is just online. We can share the link with anybody, but just to show you guys this as well, this is another available piece of material that you can use as we start fundraising. So this just sort of walks you through the project as you imagine a visitor coming through, so you're going up the arbor, walking amongst those panels. It does have the still images incorporated as well. coming down into Celebration Plaza. Again, we're managing this for large outdoor gatherings. It could be a rentable space again to generate income. Again, we imagine the screen patterns in the exterior of the building. We can have artists help us design those patterns. We have Celebration Hall with the stairs going up into the performing arts. We have those beautiful images from ideum showing some of those what those interactive digital galleries could look like. We then head back to the Fine Art Gallery. So again, the idea with the different boxes of programming was, okay, I'm in here, I might have already seen the history exhibit, and I can go directly to this other box, you know, to see just some rotating art gallery. So you're not necessarily forced to see everything. It's you can sort of plan your own visit. We've got the more permanent history gallery at the center. As we sort of circle clockwise around that central meditation drum space, we come to the educational gallery. That last box is where we imagine the cafe and retail space could be. So if we went out those doors to the left, we would go out onto the plaza. And then from here, we sort of spiral into that central space. So this was something we saw in a lot of the museums we visited, was this sort of central meditation, quiet space. You know, obviously, you know, especially I think it was at the one in DC, there's some heavy topics, right? And so having this moment of quiet and reflection at the center and the heart of the building. So now we go to the second floor. This is that performance hall. Set up, again, Steve mentioned in the round, so you could have movie nights, you could have concerts, you could have lectures. And then as we exit that, we go out onto the rooftop with those great views. Obviously, Steve mentioned also if you go up one story, you get incredible views. That's one thing that makes any site we end up taking unique. The outdoor bar, cafe space. And then as we kind of fly out the back side, there you can see a little bit more of those kind of panels, those textured panels that were inspired by some of the historical architecture we looked at. And like we said, having maybe an artist help us design those could be a great opportunity. Seeing how some of those patio spaces could be used for open outdoor markets, for educational, student work and gardening. And again, you know, doors at a bunch of different locations that lead you out, so you don't have to follow a very specific path. And then we'll just kind of back out here. We can see sort of the overall site plan again, looking back at the berm, the different parking lots, the lower level for deliveries, and that's the end. So. So yeah, so I think from here, really the goal, I know Rita, we've got sandwiches and drinks and stuff in the back, so help yourself. Rita and her team provided that. We're open for Q&A and questions. If you don't want to say,